Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for coming to the fourth presentation on the Latin American and the Caribbean Competency Virtual Series. Today, Kat will be talking about her experience in working with the federal government and how she got there. Thank you so much, Kat, for presenting, and I'll leave it to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you guys for inviting me to come and participate and to talk a little bit about my experience. Today, I'm going to be talking about working in the federal government, what that means, how to get a job in the federal government, and some opportunities that exist within the federal government. I should put a disclaimer at the start that though I work in the federal government, I am not an expert in all opportunities in the federal government. I am not an official speaker for the federal government. So I'm going to talk about my experience, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have along the way. And with that, I will dive in. So first, a little bit of an introduction of who I am. I put a lot up here because I've done a lot of things. So I graduated from Pitt in 2018. I did the class certificate as well as a major in political science and also a certificate in global studies. I did the class seminar and field trip twice, one in Mexico and then the other time in Costa Rica, which was an amazing experience both times. Also, while I was at Pitt, I was a virtual student intern with the Department of State, as well as an in-person summer intern in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. I also did a Bourne Scholarship in Brazil, and then I was a Fulbright researcher in Uruguay. And then that brought me to my current job, where I am an international policy analyst in the Office of International Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security. And at the same time, I'm currently a master's student at Johns Hopkins University and studying global security. So it's basically like international relations with a slight focus on global security. So the reason I'm giving you all this background today is because I'm going to talk about some of the experiences I've had and how they have led to getting a job in the government. But before I dive into that, I wanted to kind of just mention why work in the government. Why would you want to work in the federal government? And in my opinion, there's a lot of different reasons. One is getting to work in public service. So I have a lot of bosses that have said in the government that you are really working for the American people. You're working for all of America and doing your job. And that's really a very special opportunity to kind of be in service for the public good. Sometimes we forget that working in government is really working for the people. It doesn't always seem like that or feel like that. But that is the reality of what we do. Also along with that is, I really think there's no better place to really work on very important work. There is so much really important, really exciting work that goes on within the federal government. I know in my job, I work directly with foreign governments, and that is not something that you really get to do as much, if at all, working in kind of like the private sector, working for a company. So that's always an awesome opportunity. In the very kind of adulting world of things, they give you great benefits. So you've probably heard people talk about how you get great health insurance, that you kind of move up in pay on a regular basis. It's probably stuff that you're not thinking about as much while you're still in college. But take it from me, someone who is not so far out of college, once you get into the work world, it does really make things easier when you have really good benefits to rely on. It also has a lot of job security when you're in the federal government. That just is kind of an added bonus during a pandemic to really know that you're not going to lose your job. And finally, you have some really unique opportunities that you would never have elsewhere. Soon I will be traveling to a foreign country and meeting with a foreign government in different embassies. That is just one example of one of the really cool things that I get to do because I work for the government that, again, you can't really do in the private sector. So that's just a little glimpse into why working for the government can be a really positive experience. Before I dive into kind of how to get into government, I want to highlight kind of the jobs that are available, just a small glimpse at the jobs that are available related to Latin America. When I started working at Homeland Security, I did not know really where you could work on Latin American affairs or anything related to Latin America other than at the Department of State, where you're working directly with embassies and stuff like that. But there is a lot more in the government that is kind of connected to not just Latin America, but also international affairs more broadly. There are opportunities in the Department of Justice, working on extradition with foreign governments, working on different information sharing agreements. Department of Labor has a lot of opportunities. Department of Homeland Security, where I work, in the headquarters, they have international opportunities. They also have opportunities within USCIS. You could be a refugee officer and go and travel to Latin America and interview refugee applicants. You could also work in the intelligence community and work on writing reports about different things going on in Latin America. And there's a kind of a wide range of positions there. So if you guys are kind of in the process right now of looking for jobs in the government, I really encourage you not to limit yourself just to, the Department of State, but also to kind of all the broader different departments within the government. And once you're in the government, it's a lot easier to kind of switch from one agency to another. I work with a lot of people that started at the Department of Justice and switched over to the Homeland Security, or started at Homeland Security and switched over to the Department of State. So there's a lot of opportunities outside of what you may normally expect. So next, I kind of want to talk about ways to get into the government. So when I was your age, when I was in college, I knew that I wanted to work in the government, but I didn't really know how. And when I talked to people about how to get into government, they're like, yeah, it's really hard. And I said, okay, so how do I do it? And they said, well, you kind of have to have some luck, maybe some networking. And it was all very mysterious process. So the reality is the government does not hire kind of just the average person looking for a job. So if you just are looking for a job after graduation, it is less common that jobs are posted open to the public. While it does happen sometimes, they're harder to find. And usually if you're applying through USA Jobs, which is kind of the catch-all website to apply for federal government positions, and you'll find that they only accept the first 100 people that apply. And that usually means you've got about 20 minutes to submit an application once the job is posted. So it can be really, really hard to kind of get in that way. What they don't tell you is that there are a lot of scholarships and fellowships and other kind of workarounds to get your start in the federal government. So the first is the Bourne Scholarship, which is how I got to go work for the government. It is an amazing program in which you apply to go to a country to study a less commonly studied language. For Latin America, Western Hemisphere, the only country is Brazil. So I got to go to Brazil, and the government gave me a grant which covered the entire cost of my program in Brazil, as long as you're there for at least 6 months. And then once you come back, within 5 years of your graduation, you have to work at least 1 year with the federal government. They don't place you in a job, you still have to kind of look for jobs, but you're given opportunities to find jobs. It's a lot easier to get in. So it was just a lot easier overall if you go through that program. So I recommend, if you're interested, I can answer more questions specifically about the Bourne Scholarship kind of at the end, but also talk to the Honors College because they do a great job at helping students interested in that. Another opportunity is the Presidential Management Fellowship. So this is for something post-graduate school. And essentially the essence of the program is that you work 2 years getting fast-tracked into government. So you do a main kind of position, and then you do a 6-month rotation in a second office. So I have a friend whose main position is in the policy office of NASA, and then he did a 6-month rotation in USAID. And then once his 2 years are up, he is officially in the federal government at a kind of higher GS level, which is a higher pay level. So this is a very, very competitive program, but it's a great opportunity to kind of keep in the back of your mind if you guys are considering going to grad school and you want to kind of think about this later on. Another amazing program that can provide some benefits to get into the government is through the Fulbright Scholarship. So you might have heard there are a lot of different opportunities where you can kind of go most countries in the world. There's a lot of different programs, but the main two are to conduct research and to teach English. So you can go to these countries and you usually go for about 6 to 9 months, and you apply directly for that one country. And it's a really amazing opportunity to live in a country after you graduate. And I did the research portion of the program, and I found it to be an amazing opportunity to kind of design your own research project, which sounds super daunting, and it is when you start. But it really is a very unique opportunity to kind of construct what you want to do. You rarely have that opportunity, I think, to kind of do research on exactly what you're interested in and what you want to do. So it's something I really encourage people to consider. It feels like a daunting application, but I promise you, you can do it. It has a great reputation as a program. It has opened a lot of doors for me getting to do it. And they do give you some hiring benefits, which makes it easier. Not quite as easy as PMF or the Bourne program, but it does give you kind of a head start in getting into the government. Again, I'm more than happy to kind of go into specifics about this program later. Another really great way to kind of get a head start is by doing an internship. So one of the benefits of doing an internship that people don't really talk about is, with a lot of internships, you have to get an interim security clearance, which is kind of the great first step to kind of making it a lot easier to get a security clearance later on. And if your security clearance is still active, so if you, let's say your junior year or your senior year of college, you do an internship, and within a certain period of time, it remains active, then you can apply to kind of jobs saying, I already have a security clearance, which is great, and it saves time. So that's really looked upon positively by employers. And another reason to do an internship is because you make those connections. A lot of people get jobs in the government because they know someone or they've met someone who's willing to kind of give them a boost to make the system work for them. Because like I said, it's really hard to maneuver on your own, and it's hard to maneuver if you're not in DC and have all the opportunities kind of right in front of you. So you kind of have to find people and ways to kind of work your way in. One opportunity that is particularly, I found it very helpful and very fun, was getting to be a virtual student intern. So the federal government has these virtual student internships, which you can do from anywhere in the country, which obviously this started before the pandemic. Now I guess most internships are virtual, but you can kind of look through, there's like hundreds and hundreds of different positions that you can apply for. So if you're interested in this, I would totally recommend looking through, seeing what jobs might interest you. Of course, it's unpaid, unfortunately, but it's a great way to kind of make connections, get to meet some people that work in the government in an office that you might be interested in. For me, it worked out particularly well because I was a virtual intern for a year, and then they invited me. I applied to come in person and do a summer internship, and they were like, hey, you already interned for us for a year, we'd love to have you come in person. And I'm still connected with those people now that I worked with, and I had a great experience. So it's an opportunity, and they do have it in all different kind of federal agencies. Really cannot tell you how wide ranging those opportunities are. So a great opportunity, especially if you're like a sophomore or early on in your career and you want to kind of get an internship, but you don't really know how, and most internships tend to be within the federal government looking for, juniors or seniors. This is an opportunity to kind of get ahead in that aspect. And like the last opportunity that I actually had a mentor explain to me was taking the role of an administrative assistant. So when you hear that, you're like, that's a secretary. Like, I have a degree, I graduated from Pitt. I don't want to be an administrative assistant. But in reality, a lot of people get their start in government as an administrative assistant. People come in and they're an administrative assistant and they have their master's. That is really common. So people kind of start in the administrative assistant role. They usually work there from maybe a year, 2 years, and then they kind of work their way into kind of other roles. So it's very common that you might start, in an office. Like, there's numerous people in my office who started as an administrative assistant for someone who's an assistant secretary. So someone who's pretty important. And then after a year or two doing that, they took on a role in a policy role or working on international affairs. So it's usually easier to make that transition. And you'll usually find administrative assistant positions posted that are open to the public. So don't discount that. Also, with some of those, they are roles for a political appointees. So there's a lot of confusion sometimes with, oh, I don't want to be a political appointee. That seems kind of weird. So political appointees can pick their assistant quite often, depending on the agency. So you would work for a specific assistant secretary, for example, but it's not necessarily that your kind of political beliefs have to align with that individual, just as long as you are willing to work for that person. So something to consider. I wouldn't recommend doing it for someone that you look them up on LinkedIn and you're like, oh, I really don't like what this person believes. This person seems terrible. I wouldn't necessarily take a role as a political appointee, being an administrative assistant for that individual. But it's not as kind of directly connected to kind of political beliefs when you're an administrative assistant, as you may think. So that's kind of a little overview of some of the ways that you can kind of get into the government. Next, I kind of want to talk about what can I do now? So you guys are all in college. What are the ways that you can start preparing if you think you want to find a job in the federal government? First thing that I always say is there is no one path. Oftentimes I hear people, trying to sound, impressive and talking about how they got into the government. And they said, I networked this way. You have to talk to this person and do this, and you have to have a perfect GPA. But when you actually talk to people that work in the government, there is no perfect path. There's no one way. You do find that people that go to Ivy League schools get into the government easier, but there's still plenty of people that come from all backgrounds that can kind of get in where they want to go. So no one path. What I always recommend is, if you're interested in this type of stuff, if you're interested in, working on international affairs, find a way to get involved in that in somehow. You don't necessarily have to join 20 clubs to prove that you are really involved and you're a great leader, but just find something that you really enjoy doing that you can kind of articulate in an interview about how that would relate to a job, whether it be, volunteering. If you're volunteering, I know there's some organizations at Pitt that I volunteered with where you're tutoring Syrian refugees and say, I'm a tutor. It's a great opportunity for me to use my language and get to know other cultures. Great. That's really something you could talk about in an interview. Not that you want to do it just for the interview, but my point is exactly the opposite, that you want to do it because you really enjoy it. So find some things you really enjoy and start thinking about what that actually means and some of the skills that connect what you enjoy to what you can do in the field. Also, just in general, make connections. Everyone in DC will always talk about how important it is to network. I think networking can come off as very superficial. So I don't like to think of it that way. I'm not a person who likes to network. I'm someone that likes to actually meet and get to know people. And I like to meet new people and really connect with them. And that means kind of mentoring younger students, kind of talking to more experienced people, and kind of getting to understand what they do. And I think that's kind of a great way to get started. Even just this week, I saw someone on a panel that I attended that has a job that I was really interested in. And I sent her an email and said, hey, I was really interested in what you said. I'd love to learn more about your job, what you do. And I talked to her for like 30 minutes. And afterwards she said, if you ever want a job in this office, let me know. And I will do whatever I can to make it happen. So you never know that just asking like, hey, I'm really curious about what you do. Are you willing to talk to me about it? Most people will say yes, because they enjoy talking about what they do. And you never know where that can lead. So again, kind of going back to discover what you enjoy. College is about figuring out what you really are passionate about, what you enjoy. And kind of, as I said before, learn to sell what makes you unique. So don't necessarily do things because you think it's a good selling point to jobs, but find a good way to sell what you really enjoy and what makes you unique to future employers. And finally, last but not least, apply. I talk to so many, particularly young women, that are very hesitant to apply to things because they think that they are not qualified. I will tell you, I had the same thought process when I was in college. I didn't want to apply for things. I did not think that I was qualified to get a boring scholarship. I said, it's never going to happen. And some really great people pushed me and said, you can totally do this. Apply, see what happens. Worst case scenario, you don't get it. And then I just applied for everything I can. And you'd be surprised how many opportunities kind of come your way when you try. So at the very least, give it a shot. Even if you don't know, like, I don't know if that's a perfect fit for me. I don't know if I want to do it. I'm not 100% sold. Just apply and see what happens. In some ways, let fate decide. Give an application a shot and see what happens. Next, my kind of last point that I want to make with you guys before we kind of transition to some questions is finding your dream job. So one thing that I often find, especially if you guys are seniors, is everyone talks about like, oh yeah, I want to find my dream job. You got to find the perfect fit. The first job out of college, it needs to pay well. It needs to be exactly what I want to do. It's got to be fun. It's got to have great young employees. The reality is it's not that simple to kind of find the perfect job for you. And I would say there's not just one perfect job. There's positives and negatives about every job. And kind of one piece of advice that I got, because I was looking for jobs, when I was looking for jobs, I was doing my Fulbright Scholarship and I was abroad. And I was like, I have no money left. I need to move back to the United States. I need to find an apartment at the end of my program. And I need to have a job. And I had a mentor who gave me some great advice and said, sometimes you just need a paycheck. And that's okay. Your first job doesn't have to be the ideal job. Sometimes you just have to take a job because you need the paycheck. And that's not going to, set you on the wrong path of life or anything like that. Sometimes you just got to take the first opportunity that comes to you because it is really tough out there. And sometimes you just need to make sure you have the income. Finally, there's more to each job than just one, than just the position. So I think something we don't talk about enough is you might really like the subject matter that you work on, and you might like the day-to-day work, but if your boss is terrible, then it might not be your dream job. So there are just so many factors that go into play in finding what your dream job is, and kind of navigating that it's not really likely to be your very first job. And that's okay. So I hope in kind of talking about this, you can take the pressure off all your shoulders if you're feeling like you have to find the right job as your first job. That's totally okay. Just oftentimes, if you just kind of find a job, you find kind of the first opportunity that seems like a good opportunity. And from that, you will find what you like, what you don't like, and you can kind of keep moving and keep shifting over time to the opportunity that is best for you at that time. Because it might change. What you want right now and what you want a year from now might be entirely opposite. So that is my little bit of advice for all of you that are going into kind of the career field. And one last thing that I didn't have in this presentation, but I was kind of talking to Luis about this before, is one kind of misconception that people have about working in the federal government is that you have to politically agree with the president that you're working under. And I know that's a really tough kind of ethical choice about kind of working in the government. If you don't necessarily agree with everything that agency or the government is doing, but I really encourage all of you to consider that, first of all, federal government employees, most of them spend a lot of their career in the federal government. So they work under a lot of different politicians, and their actual focus is so much more on doing the job the best way that they possibly can. So day to day, it's not as political as people think, but also it's really important to have a diversity of opinions. And by having people that have a wide range of beliefs, you're gonna have the best kind of outcomes. So I encourage you not to kind of limit yourself to only working in the government. If your desired politician is leading the country, it really is important for the best government and to have this diversity of opinions. And obviously, there are a lot of things that come into play about whether this is the right choice for you in particular. But it is important, and your voice can make a difference. For example, if I'm the only one in the room and I can bring up something in my personal experience as a woman that makes everyone in the room rethink what policy they're implementing or what their recommendation is, that can kind of have a spiral effect in a positive way and potentially make a larger policy difference. And I've seen it happen many times. So don't entirely discount the federal government if just because of the kind of political element of working in the government. So with that, that's kind of where I will stop. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And I also kind of have some discussion questions here. I'd really like to talk to all of you and you know, see your face if possible, and kind of see what you're working on, what you're doing, and in general, what do you need from alumni like me? What can we do to help you find your perfect career, or kind of what information can we provide for you?
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I think Christopher has a question. Go ahead.
Hello. I was just wondering, so I wanted to ask like what language you went to Brazil. You said you went to Brazil, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask about like what language you studied, and also like kind of can you expand more on that program that the government offers? I know I've heard of that for like, you know, less commonly taught languages. I study Quechua at Pitt, so I know that they have a similar program for like Peru and Bolivia to go down there and study and learn and whatnot. So I just wanted to ask if you could like expand a little bit on your experience with that.
Absolutely. So I did learn Portuguese in Brazil. I did not know any Portuguese at all before I went. And that was okay for the program to say, hey, you know, I speak Spanish, I focus on Latin American affairs, I want to learn Portuguese, let me go. And I had an amazing time. I had so much fun, but I also learned so much. Luis can attest to this. I knew nothing before I came back. And then before I went, and then I came back and I was just chatting in Portuguese. I was, you know, fully conversational. I saw Luis and was just chatting back and forth with him fully in Portuguese. So you can really learn a lot through the program, which is a great benefit. More specifically, what the program looks like. Yes, I spoke like a carioca. So they recommend that you go for at least 6 months to a country. I'm not sure offhand if the Boren program allows you to study Quechua. I think you could probably make an argument for it if they don't permit it. It's been a couple years since I've looked that up. But you can go for shorter periods of time, particularly if you are in a field. I think it's kind of like math or science or engineering, and your program will only allow for you to go for a summer. The Honors College always told me it's very unlikely that you get the grant if you go for a day less than 6 months. So the way that I did it is I went for my last semester of college, and I added a summer program onto the semester. So it was 7 months, but it wasn't a full school year. So you can kind of play around with it. You can pick what program you want to do, but that all kind of goes into application. So you want to kind of, when you're applying, try to pick programs that are as language focused as possible, you know, doing a home stay if you can, because that's language immersion. So the application process is really, it's all focused on language. And then, like I said, when you come back, you have to work for the government. It's supposed to be primarily national security related agencies that you work for, but there's some flexibility. It's kind of a tier system. So tier 1 would be the ones they want you to work for, which is intelligence community, Department of Defense, DHS, State Department. I think I'm missing one, but kind of like those typical like intelligence community jobs. If not, you can kind of find opportunities in other agencies if they meet the requirement. The way it works is they will post jobs that are available. You can kind of find a job that's open to the public, but they also post jobs, which all you have to do is send your resume and your cover letter directly to the thing, and then they will follow up with you if they want to interview you, which is so much easier than trying to apply through USA Jobs. So highly recommend, if you've ever tried to navigate USA jobs, you know what I'm talking about. It is a mess. But does that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up to a more specific element of that?
No, yeah, that was super helpful. I was just looking at something super general because I hadn't really heard of like that specific program before. So yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Of course. And if you decide to apply, feel free to reach back out to me, and I'm more than happy to kind of walk you through any advice I can give on the process.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have just a quick comment going off of that. The ambassadors will have a presentation about Boren and Fulbright scholarships coming up as well. So that might be helpful as well. And I send the Instagram on the chat. That should be the easiest way to find when it is.
Awesome.
Great. Well, if there are no other questions, I would kind of like to ask you guys some of these questions that I have up here, which is generally, like I said before, what do you need from alumni like me? Is there something that I can do or kind of my fellow alumni can do to make it easier or make kind of working in the government a little bit more accessible? Any thoughts on that?
There's a question on the chat. It says, can you talk about skills you acquired at Pitt that you are using in your current job?
Yeah, so one is there's many. I think having kind of experience with Latin America and kind of my actual academic studies is really helpful to kind of show that you know language and that you have kind of general background and cultural awareness. That's really helpful. But also kind of getting to be, I was a Panoramas intern, getting to kind of talk to different people, to practice research skills. I would tell you that class, seminar, and field trip, I talk about that in interviews all the time because it really is such a unique opportunity to do research as an undergrad. And saying like, hey, I did this research when I was 18 in Mexico or in Costa Rica, you know, I surveyed 300 students. That sounds very, very impressive. It was also, I learned a lot of skills in public speaking and conducting research, in interviewing people in kind of a professional research sense. That's definitely one. Public speaking in general is a big one. Trying to think anything else. There's a lot of things, a lot of kind of, I don't want to say soft skills, but a lot of skills that you kind of gain along the way as through your classes and kind of gaining more confidence. So that's kind of the main one, I would say.
I have a quick question. Manuel, he had to leave, but he was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the clearance process.
Yeah, so the clearance process is very daunting, but essentially you fill out this, they call it an SF 87 or something, some SF, and it asks you for a lot of questions about whether you have ever done drugs, a lot of questions about any foreign contacts you have, any international travel you've had. It usually takes a couple months and you will be interviewed by an investigator. My investigator did go to all of my former places of employment in Pittsburgh. So they come around, he even came into class and said, does she work here? And I think Luis talked to him. So it's a very daunting process. It can take a long time to process clearances, but overall, it's not too bad. The one thing I will say, a lot of people, there's problems with kind of drug use. There's a lot of kind of questions I get about, can you do this job if you've done these things in your past? The advice I just give to people is the main goal of a clearance is to make sure really that you cannot be blackmailed. That's a really big concern for working in the government. If you have secrets, you don't want to be blackmailed. you don't want, the government doesn't want you to be able to be blackmailed. So be 100% honest. And then the cards will fall where they may, but the worst thing you can do is lie in a clearance form. Because if they find that out, then you will never be allowed to get a clearance in your life. So the process can be scary, but in general, just don't lie and you'll be okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I know we're down to just a couple of us now, but I'm happy to chat about anything that is of particular interest. No. That might be it.
Yeah.
Of all the questions. Yeah, but I'm more than happy to talk to any students that have interest. And you feel free to pass out my email to anyone that wants to talk about any of these topics more specifically. Luis knows I'm always happy to chat with students. So
I will. Thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you very much. This was excellent.